Thank you, George, and welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is webinar 2 in our joint series with SQA on assessment. For those of you who missed webinar 1, which we ran last Thursday, just to advise that you can go online to the CDN website now and you can review the full presentation there, so we'd encourage you to have a look at that as well. In terms of today's webinar, we had set up for all 3 webinars a Padlet to allow people to post any advanced questions, but there have been no specific questions raised up till now. So if you have any questions or queries that are burning issues for you, that you're looking for answers, please feel free to ask them at the end of the presentation using our chat box in our question and answer session. Today's webinar has 2 aims. Firstly, we want to ensure that you are familiar with key commonly used assessment terms, and secondly, that you understand the underlying principles and the variety of old and new approaches that are going to be used within the National Qualification Units this academic session. For those of you who did attend webinar 1 or who have already managed to have a look at it on our website, we highlighted a number of key documents that would be helpful for you to have read in advance of this particular webinar today, and we're hoping that you maybe did manage to find some time to look at those. But if you haven't, don't worry, Fiona will be giving a very thorough explanation of the changes and what that means for you and your own subjects, but we would encourage you strongly to have a look at these documents after the webinar today. I'm now just going to hand across to Fiona, who's going to carry on with the main part of today's presentation.
Thank you, Sandra Jane. It's lovely to be back. Just to help us get started then, will we do the first poll of today? Thank you, folks. Right, to help you plan for unit assessment during 16-17, we need to start with what the plan changes were to documents. In other words, SQA over the last 3-4 years, since the start of the new national qualifications, has regularly produced any updates to subjects each year. So again, this year in April 2016, we updated the course spec, course assessment spec and unit spec for all NQ subjects. In other words, we updated the mandatory documentation, and it's important that you're familiar with the mandatory documentation for your subject. Then at the end of May, as normal, we updated course and unit support notes. At the end of August, we provided any updated unit assessment support packs, and then at the end of September we'll provide coursework specimen question papers and exemplar question papers. And again, that's very much business as usual, folks, as we alluded to in webinar 1. At the same time, we always reserve the right to update any critical changes that occurred from grade boundary meetings during the Diet 2016. So again, we will then at the end of August put out again updated course specs, course assessment specs and unit specs, and at the end of September any revised course and unit support notes. And the details of what subjects that has happened to would be communicated in Centre News. But again, you can check your subject webpage on the open website, where you can look at our comparison documents to see quickly and easily what changes have been made throughout the mandatory documentation. Now also in May this year, we issued a subject update letter, and we do that every year. That comes from the qualifications manager, and again, it's important that apart from having read all your mandatory documentation and your course and unit support notes, you're also familiar with your subject update letter in case there's been any changes made, and often that puts those changes in a context for you too, folks. Now, I'm sure you're well aware that SQA undertook some research late December 15 into early 16, and that took two forms. We spoke to our National Qualification Support teams, and we also undertook visits to centres to really get a feel for what was working and what wasn't working with the new national qualifications. And we wanted in particular to cover two the sort of broader areas for consideration when you're delivering national qualifications, the things that can make the delivery more challenging, particularly for assessment. So it was important, really, for the new nationals in the senior phase to be successful, that the broad general education provides good preparation of candidates for progression into national courses within each subject, taking account of the level and depth of skills and knowledge required. It's really also important that candidates are presented for courses at the appropriate level, based on reliable and robust judgments of the curriculum level achieved. So, for example, pupils should be secure at curriculum level 4 prior to starting a National 5 course. And similarly, pupils should be secure at curriculum level 3 prior to embarking on a National 4 course. And I suppose too, most importantly, which is always a challenge within centres, is ensuring that sufficient time is being allocated for learning, for teaching and lecturing, and also assessment, which for any national course should be 160 hours. At the same time, when we were doing the initial evaluation, we had identified various issues. So it would be good now to hear what your issues are, and for that reason we'd like to move to poll 2 for this session. What we identified during the initial evaluation was that what centres were telling us, in other words, what teachers, senior management and candidates were telling us, was that there was overlap between unit and course assessment. There was repetition of assessment across units where similar skills are being assessed. Further guidance and exemplification would be needed around the use of combined assessment and naturally occurring evidence and assessment, and there was a need for a review and possible revision of coursework assessment tasks and/or marking instructions. So all of these were having an impact on assessment. To help address that, we put in place changes for 16-17 that will immediately reduce the number of candidates who need to be reassessed. Tracking of attainment should be easier, and more time will be available for completing coursework and preparing candidates for the question paper. What we'd like to do now is do poll 4 to see what the issues are that you have. What we have done with our plan is we've divided it into session 16-17 and session 17-18. And our actions are listed by unit assessment, course assessment, and also guidance and support. The detail of each plan for each subject based on that research that we undertook is contained within your subject review report. You can access these on our website, and we'll show you where just in a minute or two. Each subject review report has the same format and structure. So it has a background section, it has key issues, and those issues are particular for your subject, but you'll see there's a common theme against all of the issues that we identified through the initial evaluation. And probably the most important section is the action plan section for both unit and course assessment, and this is split into sessions 16-17 and 17-18 and helps you understand what options are available to you for assessment during those academic sessions. If you're looking for your subject review report, if you've not had the chance to read it yet, if you go on to www.sqa.org.uk, browse for NQ subjects, then click on your subject, it will then take you to the home page for your subject, where you'll see all the levels listed up here, and then down at the bottom you will see subject update and also something called review report, which I'll explain to you just in a second. that we would publish a guidance note at the end of August. And the guidance note is called Understanding the Next Steps for Session 16-17. And it complements your subject review report, so you should always read both together. The purpose of the guidance note on the next steps is explains the impact on assessment for candidates being presented in 2016-17, and as I said, it must be read in conjunction with your subject review report. So if you want to be fully prepared for unit and course assessment in 16-17, you must make sure you're up to date with all your mandatory documentation and any of our planned published documentation and changes, and also read your subject review report and your next steps document too. So, what's available to you in terms of approaches to unit assessment during 16-17? Well, you can carry on as you have done in the last few years. You can use the existing approaches of combined unit by unit or portfolio. There is nothing to stop you doing that, where you work to achieve 100% of the assessment standards. Or you can adopt one of our new approaches to help reduce the assessment burden for your candidate and the amount of recording that's involved for yourself too. We have three new approaches. The first one is called a cut-off score. The second one is called a threshold. And the third one is called holistic judgement. Some centres have said they do not want to change existing practice, as they want their candidates to be secure in all assessment standards in preparation for coursework assessment and the external exam. Centres may, if they wish, ask their candidates to redo tasks associated with assessment standards they've not met. However, if you take that approach, which is the original approach, this will not reduce the workload demand for candidates. However, for SQA purposes, if a candidate has passed the stated minimum number of assessment standards, and say using approach 2, they have passed the unit, i.e. if they redo an assessment standard and do not meet it, but have exceeded the threshold, then they should be awarded a pass and not a fail. Each subject has a specified approach. All three approaches, unit by unit, portfolio and combined, are still relevant to all subject levels. The new approaches listed in the slide are specified for each subject in your subject review report, and further guidance is also given in your next steps document. Lecturers do not have a choice about which approach to use in their subject level, but do still have a choice about whether they will use unit by unit, combined or portfolio. So approach 1, that's been applied in mathematics and science. And what that means is, by using approach 1, we're applying a cut-off score to a test, and it's been designed primarily for use with unit tests. If centres are using combined tests across units, then they should use the same cut-off score, as long as they ensure candidates meet the minimum cut-off for each unit. Of course, you can still allow it to achieve all assessment standards. Other changes to unit assessment in maths for 2016-17 are, in National 5 only, we've removed the numeracy bridging unit assessment support pack. So if a candidate passes all 3 units of the National 5 maths course, this will also allow them to achieve the National 5 numeracy unit. They do not need to use the bridging pack. For 2017-18, for National 4 Maths, we're going to provide an additional UASP for the expressions and formula unit, and the relationships unit and the application unit. We're also going to provide an additional UASP at National 5 for the expressions and formula unit, the relationships unit and the applications unit. And again, same, an additional UASP for the higher units in terms of the expressions and function unit, the relationships and calculus unit and the application units. Some revised UASPs were published in August, and again you can see that from your planned publication of changes that SQA have issued over the last few months. For approach 2, it's about a threshold of assessment standards. So the threshold has to be attained to pass the unit. Only some assessment standards have to be attained for the candidate to be awarded the pass. So the stated assessment standards thresholds are for each unit of the course. These assessment standards thresholds could be applied to combined portfolio approaches as long as centres ensure that candidates meet the minimum assessment standards threshold for each unit. So for example, in science, we've got a specified number of assessment standards. In art and design, for the National 4 added value unit, it's only 7 out of 10. For childcare and development, we have 1 unit with all assessment standards and 2 units having a threshold applied. So it will depend what unit you're doing. You need to make sure that you're adopting the right approach. For business management and economics or graphic communication, it might be a threshold of 5 out of 6, 7 out of 9, or 6 out of 8. And again, that will be clear in your subject review report and exemplified within your guidance note, which is the next steps document. And finally, approach 3, holistic judgement. Again, approach 3 can be applied to unit by unit combined and/or portfolio approaches. Other examples of approach 3, and again this is not exhaustive folks, it's just to give you a feel, is that in statistics, advanced higher only, transfer of evidence which demonstrates the outcome 2 of the statistics hypothesis testing unit has been achieved can also be used as evidence for outcome 2, and therefore that reduces the assessment burden. Evidence can be used for both unit and coursework. So for example, in ESOL, you can exemplify the use and relevance of evidence generated for the speaking and listening requirements of unit assessment for the IAC performance. Some subjects have used a combined approach, so they've adopted approach 1 and 2 within their subject. And one of the subjects that have done that are the sciences, where they will have a cut-off and a threshold applied. So just make sure when you're assessing a unit and you're working through the outcomes, you're clear about what outcome has a cut-off and what outcome has a threshold. Again, some subjects have also combined approach 1 and 3, and an example of that is statistics. So in outcome 1, there is a cut-off score, and again in outcome 2 and 3 they're taking a holistic approach, which was the example I just gave you, where they are generating evidence from one outcome and claiming it against another outcome. Again, some subjects too have also combined or taken approach 2 and 3. So again, for physical education, approach 2, we've got a threshold applied, and then we've also got approach 3, which is the holistic approach, where the candidate's coursework or added value unit performance can be used to achieve the unit outcomes and assessment standards in one of the required activities. And again, your subject review report and your guidance note, i.e. NQ Next Steps, will keep you right in terms of how you assess there. Other subjects that are using approach 2 and 3 include art and design and music technology. We've also introduced some other changes to the units, again to help reduce the impact of assessment for both candidates and lecturers. So alongside these 3 approaches, we've also removed from some subjects assessment duplication and overlap. So for example, in English and evaluation unit at all levels, we've removed assessment standard 1.1, identify and explain the purpose and audience from both the reading and listening outcomes. Also for creation and production unit at all levels, we've removed assessment standard 1.3, communicate meaning at first reading from the writing outcome. Both units, all levels, review the place of listening within unit assessment. Consideration is to be given to removing listening from the analysis and evaluation unit and subsuming the development of listening skills within the talk element of the creation and production unit. These published recommendations for that will be implemented in sessions 17-18. And finally, for the literacy unit, all levels, we're going to review the assessment standards for the literacy unit, giving consideration to the relationship with English units. And again, any recommendations for that will be published for implementation in session 17-18. So again, make sure you read your subject review report and your guidance note to see what's happening in 16-17 and what to look out for in 17-18. And we've also given you some other examples there on the slide to do with science and environmental science. And again, some further guidance has been provided. In art and design, we've provided clarity in UAS regarding amounts of work and making minimum requirements clearer in the judging evidence table. For science at the National 4 Added Value Unit, any topic that is commensurate with the level is now acceptable, and it helps facilitate fallback. And finally, economics for unit assessment, we produce guidance on appropriate use of assessment conditions matched to the instrument of assessment. So all of these will help make the assessment clearer for you and your candidate. As I've alluded to, there will be further changes to unit assessment for 17-18, and we're carrying out a review during 16-17 and will advise on any changes to be implemented in 17-18 as soon as we can. Also, if there's anything that you're doing within your centre that you think would be good practice on either the existing approaches of unit by unit combined or portfolio, or in the new approaches of cut-off, threshold or holistic, please share that with us. We're always still looking for examples of good practice to put on our secure site in relation to unit assessment. Other support that's available for you. We are running again our Understanding Standards events this year. So again, please sign up for those. You can log on using our corporate events website, and there are still places available. We're also offering some webinars, and any webinars that SQE are offering along with the Understanding Standards events, the materials are available from those on the Understanding Standards website and also on our secure site. So even if you can't get to an event, you should be able to access the material afterwards. We're going to produce 2 tests with cut-off scores. They'll be available in December for maths. And again, the guidance note, NQ Next Steps, gives you guidance on how to adapt current UASPs if you want to adapt them to reflect one of the new approaches, cut-off, threshold or holistic. We're also providing, again, CPD, which again can be arranged locally with your subject implementation manager from SQA. And again, we're having webinars, as I mentioned, and also Skype sessions for centres that are a little bit further away from us. So please, if there's anything that you want to know about unit assessment and you're not clear from the mandatory documentation and your review report and your guidance note, please don't hesitate to speak to your liaison manager at SQA, who will be happy to try and help you. What I'd like to do now is hand back over to Sandra Jane, who will tell you what to do to get the best out of Webinar 3.
Thank you, Fiona. That was a really thorough and very detailed explanation of some of the changes. I'm sure that has been really helpful for any staff listening into this webinar today. As I mentioned earlier on in the session, this is webinar 2 of a 3-part series, and our next webinar is taking place next Thursday, the 6th of October. A couple of points just to note. The webinar that we're going to be running next week is actually looking at best practice in assessment, and so it will be covering aspects that relate not just to the national qualifications, but also to qualifications at other levels, such as higher nationals, professional development awards, or skills for work programs.